thank you for joining us tonight and coming all the way from Prague and showing this incredible moving movie. I guess we will just have Rez and I will have a opening questions and then we'll leave the floor to you if you have any questions. So you use uh through document and innovation you wrote this incredibly moving uh film as well. Would you please tell us your decision to make the film in the first place and using animation in the film?
Hi everybody. Thank you, Hayan, for inviting me. Thank you, Artis. Thank you, Lila. Thank you, New York Kurdish Center, and giving us this amazing opportunity to be here, and School Nesdam. Um, Starting with your question. Uh, I mean, as we all watch her story and we all know that it was a really hard story to tell, and wanted to we wanted to do justice to her because she already had suffered a lot, and we did not want it to take from her and just make a movie that is just her story out there. We wanted to do something that would make us proud and happy that we are doing something, knowing that it's really important, and do justice to her, and also try to make the audience to actually see the horror face of genocides and what happens to women and children. So when we first met Besime, we wanted her to introduce us to other Yazidi women, and Livmek is actually a future Latvian. But then there's a security issue because not many of them are open to cameras, and they are still afraid of ISIS. And this story was filmed in Canada, but she was still afraid. And everybody who she got in touch and tried to put us in contact did not want to talk to the camera. But they were happy to tell us what happened to them and their own stories. So we had back and forwards for like 2 years with Basement and tried to tell this story. And finally, it came to a point where there were more Yazidi women who were saved or who managed to escape, and they were openly talking to the cameras and to TVs and trying to bring awareness to this issue. So then and I think this in a way encouraged her to tell us the story. Then one day we went there and she said that she wants to tell the story, but she said that she does not want to show her face because she was still afraid. So her children. Um, then we had to think about it. We did actually come up with a first cut, which we asked some TV channels who reported on the issue, and they had the archive footages that they shared with us. And then we could actually use them and tell her story. But then it was not exactly given, this sense of like, what was her story about? It was more of a news piece. And we didn't want to do that. So, but we had to tell her story without showing her face. Then we came up with this idea of animation. And the animator is here, Alex Scherf. You can reach out by. Woo! And yeah, Agi. And the one that is filming is the director of photography and the co-producer on the. So then we reach out to Alex, and um, he was just amazing. He wanted to know a lot, so we came up with all these news articles about genocide, what happened, and we're just like keep sending him these news articles, study, study, study. And viewers, thinking about the animation, and we were like, we had these meetings, and then finally we come up with this shortcuts of her story.
Thank you. You did an amazing job. Thank you for sharing her story, bring her story to life, and it will resonate with us.
Osigogin.
Thank you, Heliman. And thank you, everyone. I had to take a moment to recover from that film. It was very powerful, but as we all experienced, and I could hear also behind me, um, others crying like me. So a moment to just digest how traumatic it is watching, and then let alone living through that. Um, I guess I'm coming from this from a different kind of experience. I worked for the last 5 years building cases for the prosecution of ISIS in the Kurdish region of Iraq. And so I spent many, many days and months and years documenting, interviewing these Yazidi women that had been either rescued or escaped, and so obviously who still remain missing, and their whereabouts are unknown to this day, approximately 2,600. Um, and part of that process is documenting these really traumatic details. And you're right about the security. It is an absolutely critical factor. One of the people that we were interviewing had come face to face with her um, captor in the German markets in Cologne, actually, because he had managed to escape when the fall of ISIS, so-called the fall of so-called ISIS happens, and some parts were liberated. Many ISIS perpetrators had tried to blend in with the local um, communities that were escaping, and managed to actually escape into where they had come from. And in this case, he had been a German. And so the security risk is absolutely real, even to this day, that there are many fighters that joined ISIS and um, are either in Europe or in Iraq and Syria, and still have not been arrested. Um, so my question, I guess, to you is, um, in your conversations with the Yazidi woman that you were interviewing and talking to for this film, um, did you come across any of their thoughts or aspirations for the justice process? Their thoughts? Did they still have hope that there could be any justice process? And did that come through with any of the women that, obviously that it was about sharing the story, but did those conversations come up? Yeah, that's a really good question. We did talk about if they were hopeful for the future, and if they were thinking that they were going to, you know, have the justice for their lost one. And um not really, they were not really hopeful. And knowing that um especially for Besme and the people that she knew and we talked to, her whole village was wiped out. It's the Kocho, like the village of Kocho. And there was some number around 1,500, and all the men and elderlies were killed. And they don't even know where is their body. There are still mass graveyards that were supposed to be opened, and this is like a really slow process here. So they don't know if they're ever going to be able to reach their bodies, at least. So before the justice, I think, there is still this one like first step that has to be taken, which is then, you know, reaching to their lost ones, at least even if it's their bodies. And this is kind of the conversation we had. And for the justice, I know that there were these a few articles that I guess one is trying to, at least they recognize this as a genocide, and they did mention that, there should be this should be documented to bring the justice for these women and families. But it's also a very slow process. So these are all adding up to their um hope being loose, I guess. And it's like I said, it's really hard for them to move to that stage without having, without knowing where is the body. So um
Thank you, Halima. There are so many layers to uncover and unfold. and international community still not very responsive, you know, more on legal side, rats. So let's open the floor for questions and comments. Are there any questions or yes?
I'm going to ask the question is very, very forgive. Um, did the U.S. intervention in the region during the Obama and Trump administrations did that accomplish anything positive or uh I for either the or was or Rojava or the Yazidi population or not? I don't know. Not the shaped that I haven't been doing my homework. Despite all the flood of new, I still don't have a basic perspective how it was imbued in the Kurdish society. Did it accomplish something both good and bad? Was it more good than bad, more bad than good? I honestly don't know.
Is this for Halime or Rise? This question.
Oh, radio. I don't.
Okay, why don't we start with you, Halima?
The setup, the very Trump administration, the military innovations of both the Obama and Trump administrations during this time here. I am a sweet Alpha.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, Kayarati would be great one to answer that.
And fighting like Rezo can bring us in the go perspective.
This is my personal perspective, so people may think differently in the room, but I do absolutely think that it helped because the U.S. was supporting, and as you see on from the film, directly involved in fighting ISIS on the front lines, the Rojava YPJ and the, as we call them in Kurdish, Yapaka, they were directly on the front lines, and these are key allies of the US. And so I think, of course, boots on the ground, they were Kurdish fighters, that a lot of funding and support did come from the US. And even in the Kurdish region of Iraq, the KDP and the Kurdish regional government is supported by the US. So I think in the movement to fight ISIS, Daesh, and free both Kurdish and Yazidi Kurdish and other Syrian minority communities that had been held captive under ISIS, I think that the US did have a positive, you know, positive effects on the region in that time. And so that's my personal perspective. Others, I don't know, they may be coming at it from a different angle. But when I was there on the ground and the news that we were getting, especially during this time when, especially around the fall of Mosul and Raqqa, when key strongholds of ISIS, the U.S. was supporting that movement directly. So that's my opinion, that the U.S. Army was very supportive, the U.S. government is very supportive.
Of course, we can ask more as Rojava goes through changes, as Syria goes through changes. International community, including U.S., should make sure that Kurds get their freedom and minority groups are protected. So there is always room for U.S. to join forces with Kurds to make sure what Kurds do in Rojava and in the Middle East for humanitarian, for the sake of democracy, for women could be implemented. So I hope we. Do you want to add something, Abhimag? Thank you for your question. Any other question or comments? Yes.
I have two questions. One of them is for you. Um, I'm curious about the process that you went through and finding this hard. In you were speaking, they're going to speak with you, but also be there. I I'm familiar with the research, especially about Visagia at Pula. So I'm curious to hear why Canada, why specifically. Uh,
Yeah, I was living in Canada, and yeah, in a nutshell, I guess. Yeah, very. It's simple, but there's more to it. So, I'm actually a TV reporter. I used to work for a TV channel, and in 2014, I was in the order, Syrian Turkish order, and I was covering the war in Syria and Rojava and Kobani. And during that time, I interviewed so many Yazidi people. And in 2016, I moved to Canada. And while I was there, I heard that many of them were coming to Canada, or the Canadian government was helping them, or sponsors were trying to bring them there. Um, so I it was in a way, I think it was, I always working with this issue back home, and now that I'm in Canada and I see that they're there, I wanted to focus more on that. And so I was involved with the uh Kurdish Community Center in Toronto, and I asked them if I could meet them. And so that's how we got in contact with them, and that's how I met her, and I wanted to tell her a story. Um, is there anything else I'm missing, or
I imagine all she wants to do is talk about. Like, I feel that very.
yeah, it's it's okay. So in 2019, I actually got in contact with her, and she was back in Iraq trying, and they actually she got a news that she has to come back to identify if, like, there was a mass graveyard that they opened, and they asked for her to come to identify if that was her husband or not. So she was back in Iraq when I first got in contact with her over the phone. And she thought that I was somebody worker for the government and trying to help her, which is, I think most of them actually did think that way. But then, I told her about the project, and I told her that I wanted to tell these stories because I think that they're important, and, they're in a way also documents too, right? Like, we were talking about the justice, and this could be part of, like, is legal side of it, if to listen the stories from the first hand. And she she was back in Iraq, and then COVID started. She couldn't come back to Canada, which was another issue, and her children were in Canada. She had to spend a few months in Iraq, and later she managed to come back, but the COVID hit, and we couldn't actually talk. And it took us 2 years to actually meet her in person and talk to her and tell her all the want to do. So this is a whole process. I think if you starting with the idea all the way to final stage, it took us at least 8 years fully. Yeah.
Hey, I see two hands. I don't know how many more questions we can have, but the one on the corner, I think, raised his hand first.
I wanted to make a comment about the contrast between the two movies. And it made me think, it said, well, on the one hand, people use words like liberation, freedom, revolution, and on the other hand, oppression, injustice, genocide. And I think what struck me so powerfully was the contrast between the two movies was, on the one hand, a real living example of what liberation looks like, what freedom looks like, what revolution looks like in real life. And then on the other hand, you have the other movie, which shows what does oppression, what does injustice, what's a genocide look like, and read the contrast between the two, which is so powerful and so dramatic. And that's how it impacted me, and I wanted to share that. She's a beautiful, there's a woman that made the movies, just incredible.
Okay. This is almost the character of courage that you summarized. Thank you for your observation. I think we have 5 more minutes and last 2 questions. Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much for the movie. And I have seen a couple of documentaries and movies about Israeli women. And I wonder, well, my question is for both here. Uh, an unpolished crime is repeated, and we don't know whether these ISIS members are specifically trial for the crime against Yazidi men and women. If they have been, has there been any movie or or Halima, are you planning to document those trials? Because we'll know about Nuremberg trials, and is there going to be Nuremberg for my Yazidis?
Then you do all
I don't think there is any movie that is
Are you planning to do one?
um that's a great question. There's so much to just wanting to tell this story. But I think that's a whole different topic. I would love to, why not? I mean, I would love to tell a story that's, at least to me too, it would be a closure, knowing that these are facing the trials.
Yeah, so regarding the trial, I mean, as far as I'm aware, there aren't any movies documenting the trial process. But as far as the trials go, there have been trials uh, prosecuting ISIS members in a few different jurisdictions. There's been cases in the US, there has been in France, in Germany, and there are many cases that people are actively working on to build more evidence on for the prosecution of ISIS members. But the challenge is, I think, twofold. One, a lot of ISIS men currently held in Syria or Iraq uh, haven't necessarily been identified specifically to a particular, like, that they're identified as ISIS members, but they're still in the process of finding evidence that would amount to the crimes that they should be held accountable for. And there are challenges. One, we know the situation in Syria. The prospect of a trial happening in Syria right now is not a top priority. They've got more serious things that they're dealing with right now, with the transitional government and previously their own war and conflict. And so having a trial process was not the first thing that people were working on there. In the Iraq, the challenge is that the laws that exist in Iraq are not appropriate for prosecuting ISIS members. And the reason is because they don't have um, genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes in their domestic law. And so the most that they could be charged for in this case would be, for example, terrorism laws. And that just does not reach the threshold of, the horrific crimes that the ISIS members committed. And also there is another challenge on the other end is there are a lot of human rights organizations, jurists, international community that were not happy for trials to be commenced in Iraq because Iraq still has the death penalty. And so while they wanted to see justice for the crimes that they committed, they did not want them to be held liable just for terrorism laws. They wanted them to be held to the high level of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And then also they did not want them to be subject to the death penalty because in some people's minds it's equating us to the barbarism of ISIS, and what the atrocities that they've committed are. The other challenge is that there have been many ISIS men who are in, for example, Al-Hol camp in Syria, and their foreign governments refuse to take responsibility for them. One of them is, for example, I can speak directly on a case that we tried very hard in New Zealand. He was a New Zealand citizen, and he was in Al Hol camp, and we were trying to get the New Zealand government to take responsibility and prosecute him in New Zealand. The New Zealand government at the time said no, he left New Zealand, he's ripped up his passport, we don't want anything to do with them. But actually that fails to address the importance of justice in these cases, because if foreign governments are not extraditing their citizens back home for them to face justice and trial, they're leaving the responsibility on countries like Iraq and Syria that do not have necessarily the right laws, the right resources, the right processes, due process, fair trial rights to actually do justice to these crimes. And I think that's really paramount that foreign governments take responsibility for the foreign fighters that left their countries to go there and fight in this horrific and barbaric organization. So maybe that's something we could all be doing, calling on our own governments to take back the citizens and hold them to account.
I guess we are out of one more question. Okay, great. Are there any questions?
Well, there was a second question here.
Yeah. Yes.
I just tried to Google it also because it showed up actually. I'm really curious what happened to Jinwan after 2023 February.
Can you say?
The earthquakes on February 2023.
Yes.
It Jinwan is up. As far as I know, no, they were not. they were not in that region. They still very much functioning and building future for us all to use as a bright side and hopeful side in this world. Thank you all for coming and joining this.